This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening and welcome to the Glazov Gang. I'm your guest, Robert Spencer, the author of The Complete Infidel's Guide to ISIS. Tonight's show is hosted by none other than Jamie Glazov, the renowned premier counter-jihad chatfest host. And now, here's Jamie.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As you already know, Robert Spencer is our very special guest tonight, and he will be discussing his book, The Complete Infidel's Guide to ISIS. And Robert, we have a new way of doing things. You ask yourself the first question.
The first question, Jamie, would be, why am I here at this late hour? And the obvious answer is because it is important, it is imperative indeed, that we clear away the fog of misinformation and disinformation that surrounds the question of the Islamic State, or ISIS, the foremost evil force in the world today, and that which Obama once again dissembled and lied about and gave overconfident predictions of victory just recently at the UN.
What's the second question?
What is your favorite Beatles album?
Okay, Robert. ISIS, who are they?
The Islamic State is, according to its own self-description, the global caliphate, the sole legitimate government to which all Muslims owe allegiance. It comes historically from Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Zarqawi, you may recall, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi was the commander of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, killed by an American airstrike in 2006. And he led a faction of Al-Qaeda that was dedicated to establishing ultimately a caliphate in Iraq. But Osama bin Laden and Zawahiri, who took over the leadership of Al-Qaeda after bin Laden was killed, they both thought that it was not the right time to establish a caliphate, that if they did, it would be toppled by the Americans. And they cautioned Zarqawi and his successors to go slowly. But they disputed on this, and they ultimately had a split. The Al-Qaeda in Iraq group thought that it could establish a caliphate and get away with it, and it renamed itself first the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, and then finally just the Islamic State alone when it proclaimed the caliphate on June 29th, 2014.
Yeah, and Robert, in your book, so important, you show this correspondence between al-Zawahiri and al-Zarqawi. I know this question will conflate a little bit with what you just said, but summarize for us, for our viewers, why that correspondence is so important.
Well, there was just one group, Al-Qaeda, and it had its branch in Iraq. And even 10 years ago, it's very interesting to note, Zawahiri was writing to Zarqawi and saying, yes, we agree, we want to establish a caliphate in Iraq, and we want to do it within the next few years. It's important to note that because even though that was communication that was intercepted at the time, people, I think, just tossed off the idea that a caliphate would be established or underestimated the implications of it. But ultimately, when they broke over the concept of the caliphate, it was really over the question of whether the Americans would intervene or not. And Al-Qaeda disavowed the Islamic State and vice versa. But the Islamic State so far has been proven correct. The Americans have not gone in and toppled the caliphate, and Barack Obama has contented himself with cosmetic airstrikes that are more to make political points than to do any real good in turning back the gains of the Islamic State.
Thank you, Robert. You know, you mentioned Obama. This is just surreal. He's referred to ISIS and the Islamic State as a JV team. Give us the reality in terms of the territory they now control and how big and strong they are. How did they manage this so quickly?
The Islamic State controls a territory larger than Great Britain, and 8 million people live under its sway. And it also, because of its claim to be the caliphate, has gained the allegiance of other jihad groups around the world, so that it also controls territory in Libya, in Nigeria with the Boko Haram group, in the Philippines with Abu Sayyaf, and elsewhere. And so it's a very, very extensive and multinational group. And it is also gaining recruits all around the world. There are now 30,000 Muslims from 100 countries who have gone to Iraq and Syria and also to ISIS holdings in Libya to join it because they accept its claim to be the new caliphate.
Robert, there's a timeline here of just the absurd statements Obama has made. He spoke at the UN the other day. But before that, his administration admitted that there is no strategy. And I think till now, of course, we would agree that there is no strategy. But this actually came out of the administration's mouth.
What's really astonishing is that the administration said last August 2014 that they had no plan, no strategy to defeat ISIS, and that was recently reaffirmed just last June 2015, that they had no plan and no strategy. And yet then Obama went to the UN just a few days ago and said, I was here a year ago and I challenged other countries to come up with a plan to defeat ISIS. And I think, why is it their job? He's supposed to be the leader of the free world. Why can't he come up with a plan? And exactly who is he waiting on to come up with the plan that he thinks is viable? Putin gave him one. He didn't like it because it involves toppling Assad. Obama wants to persist in the fiction that the Islamic State will fade away if Assad is toppled, because he wants to give people the impression that it has nothing to do with Islam, and it's just a resistance movement to the Assad regime. He does not acknowledge that the Islamic State has plenty of statements that make it very clear they're not going to stop if Assad is gone. They're going to keep going. They have a global vision. But since that vision is intrinsically based in the Quran and the Sunnah, Obama wants to ignore it. And he thinks that by toppling Assad, he'll do away with the threat, when actually the only people poised to take advantage if Assad is gone are the ISIS group. And so he would be making them stronger and more emboldened than ever by toppling Assad.
Thank you, Robert. Now, you're speaking at the UN the other day at the Leaders' Summit on countering ISIL and violent extremism. Just bizarre listening to him. But not bizarre when you know what the left is about, but still so surreal. We've got the Islamic State, which is inspired and sanctioned by Islamic verses, and Obama is saying that, all he mentions is that ISIS is killing Muslims. So Muslims are the victims, and then he adds to that anti-Muslim bigotry must be stopped. So we've got Islamic violence towards non-Muslims, and of course, as we know, towards Muslims, but the solution is only to mention Muslim victims, and that bigotry towards Muslims, is, if it even exists to a dangerous level, should be stopped. What is this? This is a scary and weird charade.
Well, Obama seemed to betray in saying that he knew that in Islamic law it's forbidden for a Muslim to kill a non-Muslim. Forbidden for a Muslim to kill a fellow Muslim. But it is not at all forbidden. It's in fact encouraged and exhorted in the Quran in numerous places for a Muslim to kill a non-Muslim. And so what we have is Barack Obama betraying that he's aware of this, and he knows that the only thing that's going to move the Islamic world to oppose ISIS is if they're killing Muslims. But then he turns it around to portray Muslims as the victims by saying at the same time we have to go against those who link Islam with terrorism, which cuts out the guts from everything he said in the speech also about fighting the ideology of ISIS. He ignores and denies what that ideology is and says that he's going to fight against those who say what it is honestly, and then he says we have to fight it. It's completely inconsistent and hypocritical.
Robert, with the words that come out of Obama's mouth and with the actions and inactions that are spawned by those words, how will this defeat ISIS?
There's no way that Obama's plan can defeat ISIS. If he removes Assad, then ISIS will take advantage, seize Damascus, and advance to the borders of Lebanon and Israel. And it will be emboldened by the removal of Assad to probably attack those countries. Israel, of course, is ready. Lebanon, I think they could probably roll through pretty quickly. The problem is that Barack Obama doesn't really have any plan to defeat ISIS, even at this point. And the only plan that he has come up with, which is to remove Assad, will only strengthen ISIS.
Robert, very soon a brave and courageous new president enters the White House. He will be brave and he will sincerely want to defeat ISIS. He calls, or she calls, Robert Spencer. Robert Spencer flies in on a private jet, comes into the president's office, and has a minute and a half, and the president is listening and asks you, how do we stop ISIS? What do you say?
Go in with ground troops, clean it out. It'll take weeks like it did with Saddam's regime. And then don't make the same mistake we made 10 years ago and following of Wilsonian nation building. There's never going to be a Western-style secular republic there. Just stop, let them form their own government, but stop the jihad training, stop the jihad preaching, stop the sending of jihadis to the U.S. Meanwhile, reconfigure our international alliances along the lines of what Putin called for in terms of an international alliance against terrorism. And stop with the self-defeating, feudal, and illusory alliances with countries like Turkey and Pakistan that are actually effectively on the side of the jihad force. And above all, Jamie, I got to say, call upon Muslims in the United States and elsewhere to back up the condemnations of ISIS with real teaching against it. There's not a single program in any American mosque right now to teach young Muslims why they should reject the understanding of Islam represented by the Islamic State, even as American Muslims are going there.
Robert, we're completely behind you. You obviously know what's going on. If American troops have got to do this, fair enough. But let me ask this. It really angers me and so many people that American boys and girls have to put their lives on the line when the Arab world and the Muslim world should be doing this themselves. You've got this is ISIS, and this is the amount of the armies in the Arab world. Why aren't they doing anything?
Because they know that ISIS is working from the Islamic texts, and there's significant support for ISIS in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan, in Egypt, and elsewhere. And so if they move too strongly against them, they know they could be facing an insurrection at home from ISIS sympathizers. So they're trying to keep a lid on that.
Robert, you introduced the show, and now you conclude the show for us by saying goodbye for us.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Glazov Gang, starring Jamie Glazov as himself, and with our special guest, me. Tune in again next week for another exciting episode of the Glazov Gang.
And make sure to buy and get the Complete Infidel's Guide to ISIS by Robert Spencer. He's the director of jihadwatch.org. Robert, you are a Superman and a hero.
Jamie, it's been great. We'll see you again next week.
Good night.